I found out I was a father from a piece of paper that wasn't meant to hurt me. It was a school enrollment form, thin, white, folded carelessly at the bottom of a backpack I didn't recognize as mine. Father's name, unknown. Mother's emergency contact, her name. The ink was neat, calm, like the truth had learned how to write without shaking. I stood there in the hallway of a school I had never visited, listening to children laugh behind closed doors, while my chest collapsed in silence. I read it again, and again, as if repetition could soften betrayal, as if the word unknown would eventually recognize me. She hadn't cheated. She hadn't lied to destroy me. She had erased me to save me. The irony tasted like rust. She hid her pregnancy when my career was finally lifting off the ground, when producers were calling, when interviews needed a clean image, when my dreams demanded sacrifices I didn't know were being paid in blood. She disappeared quietly. No goodbye. No explanation. Just absence. And now there was a daughter with my eyes learning cursive without me. The rain outside the school windows fell like applause for a life I wasn't part of. I didn't know yet if I wanted revenge, forgiveness, or the courage to knock on that classroom door. But I knew one thing. The story I thought I survived was still breathing, and it was about to speak. I met her on a day that smelled like wet pavement and unfinished promises. The kind of day the city wears like a confession it never intends to finish. Rain blurred the streetlights into trembling halos, and people moved with their heads down, guarding their small urgencies. I was late to nowhere important, carrying rejection letters in my chest like folded knives. That's when I saw her. She stood beneath a bus stop shelter, as if it were the last dry place on earth, holding a thin cardboard folder too tightly. Her knuckles were pale, the way they get when you're afraid something might slip away if you relax even a little. The rain clung to her lashes, silvered them, turned her blink into a small act of bravery. When she looked up and our eyes met, something inside me shifted, an unannounced rearranging of furniture in a room I thought I knew. We didn't smile at first. We studied each other like people who had learned caution early. The bus was late. The rain was rude. The city hummed like it didn't care about either of us. She took a half step away, then stopped, as if distance were a choice she wanted to make carefully. I said something about the weather, because silence felt heavier than honesty. She answered, because she understood that weight. We talked like people afraid of silence, small things first, meaningless things we dressed up as safe. The rain that never knew when to stop. The city that swallowed dreams whole and still asked for rent. She told me she'd just moved back, that the city looked different when you returned with fewer illusions. I told her it looked the same to me, which was a lie I needed at the time. We laughed softly, the kind of laughter that asks permission before existing. She said her name, and it landed in my chest like a stone dropped into water. I said mine and felt exposed, like I'd just handed her something breakable. The bus didn't come. The rain didn't ease. The shelter felt suddenly intimate, the air close enough to share breath without touching. I noticed the folder again creased at the corners, a faint coffee stain at the edge. It looked like it had been carried for a while. "What's in there?" I asked, nodding toward it, and immediately regretted the question. Some doors shouldn't be pointed at. She hesitated, then shrugged in a way that said she was used to being asked for more than she wanted to give. "Applications," she said. "Letters. Proof I exist on paper." I told her about my career, the auditions that promised everything and delivered nothing, the rooms where casting chairs squeaked louder than my lines, the way ambition keeps you awake, even when love tries to tuck you in. I spoke like someone who'd learned to turn disappointment into a rehearsed anecdote. She listened like it mattered, like I mattered. She didn't interrupt. She didn't fix it. She didn't look away when my voice tightened around the truth. When she smiled, it wasn't loud. It was careful, as if she'd learned that joy should never announce itself too boldly, in case the world overheard, and decided to correct it. The rain droned on the shelter roof, steady as a pulse. Somewhere, a siren passed and took its urgency with it. Time thinned. She asked me what I was working on now, and I told her about a script I couldn't finish because the ending felt dishonest. She said endings were overrated anyway, that beginnings were where people told the truth by accident. I wondered what truths I was spilling without realizing it. I wondered what she saw when she looked at me, an artist mid-fall, a stranger with wet cuffs, a man pretending his hands didn't shake. The bus finally came, hissed to a stop, opened its doors like a mouth that expected something from us. She didn't move. I didn't either. It felt like a test we hadn't studied for. The doors closed. The bus pulled away, trailing a spray of water and regret. We walked instead down a street slick with reflections. The rain followed us like a memory we couldn't outrun. She walked beside me without touching, a deliberate space between our arms that felt intentional, respectful, dangerous. Every step echoed with what we weren't saying. I noticed how she stepped around puddles, how she read the ground before trusting it. I wondered how many times she'd been surprised by a misstep. We passed a gallery with its lights still on, canvases glowing behind glass. One painting caught her eye, a wash of blue and gold that looked like a storm learning how to forgive itself. She slowed, leaned in, her breath fogging the window. "I like this one," she said. "It feels like someone stayed." I didn't know why the word stayed lodged in my throat. I didn't know why I answered, "Me too," when I had no idea what she meant. The rain softened. The city held its breath. At the corner where we would part, the streetlight flickered, uncertain of its duty. She shifted the folder to her other arm, as if redistributing weight could change outcomes. I wanted to say something that would make the night permanent. I wanted to be careful enough not to scare her away. She reached into her bag and pulled out a crumpled receipt, smoothed it against her thigh, then wrote her number with a pen that skipped on the paper. The ink smudged slightly, imperfect, human. She handed it to me like a secret she trusted me not to lose. "Text me," she said, and there was courage in how casually she said it. "I will," I said, and meant it with a sincerity that surprised me. She hesitated, then stepped back, creating that space again. The distance felt like a promise with conditions. She turned and walked away, her figure dissolving into the crowd, rain stitching her outline back into the city. I stood there longer than necessary, receipt warm in my palm, the number bleeding gently into my skin. Some meetings feel like coincidence. Others feel like the opening sentence of a tragedy you're too hopeful to stop reading. I didn't know which this was yet. I only knew that the rain had stopped, and something else had begun quietly, carefully, already learning how to leave. Loving her felt like learning a language without grammar-only tone, pauses, the meaning hidden between breaths. There were no rules, no structure, just instinct and repetition. I learned her fluency slowly, by listening to how she said my name when she thought I was asleep, by noticing the way she folded silence around my worst days so they didn't cut as deep. We talked late into the night, as if darkness made us braver. On rooftops where the city lights flickered like fragile hopes. In cafes that smelled of burnt espresso and second chances. Through phone calls that stretched until dawn, threatened to expose everything we were afraid to admit. Sleep always lost first. It retreated quietly, knowing it wasn't welcome where we were building something fragile and hungry. She memorized my failures the way some people memorize prayers. Not to judge them, never that, but to understand where I bled. Every audition I didn't get, every email that began with "unfortunately," every silence that followed my name instead of applause. She remembered dates I wanted to forget and softened them with context. "It wasn't your time," she'd say. "Not because you weren't enough. Because the world is slow to catch up." When I won something small, a callback, a decent review, a nod from someone important, she celebrated like we'd conquered the world. She cooked dinners that turned my kitchen into a place worth returning to. She clapped softly, eyes shining, as if she'd always known this version of me would arrive eventually. I let myself believe her belief could substitute for my doubt. I was always chasing something. Success that stayed just beyond reach. Validation that tasted sweet but vanished too quickly. A version of myself that deserved applause without conditions. I ran toward it with the urgency of someone afraid to stop moving, afraid that stillness would reveal how unfinished I was. She stayed behind me, quietly tying the loose ends I never noticed, paying attention to details I dismissed, remembering appointments, deadlines, the names of people I should care about. She folded my chaos into something almost livable. When I forgot to eat, she cooked. When I forgot to sleep, she dimmed the lights and sat beside me, counting my breaths until they slowed. When I doubted myself, she believed harder so hard it sometimes scared me. She spoke certainty into places I'd abandoned. When I broke down, she didn't panic. She went quiet. She absorbed my weight without complaint. Without demanding, I become lighter for her sake. I mistook that silence for strength, never wondering what it cost her to carry me. I told her she was my peace, and she smiled like it was a compliment she'd been waiting to earn. I didn't realize then that peace often pays the highest price, that it is asked to be patient, forgiving, endless, that it is expected to endure storms quietly so others can pretend the sky is clear. Our days blurred into routines that felt permanent, mornings with shared coffee mugs and half-finished conversations, afternoons apart but tethered by messages that said thinking of you without needing a reason, nights where she rested her head against my chest, listening to my heart like it was something worth studying. I learned the weight of her body, the rhythm of her breathing, the way her hand fit against my spine as if it had been designed there. She waited through missed calls without accusation, through postponed plans labeled just until things settle, through promises I made casually, assuming time would be generous with us. Every delay was temporary in my mouth. Every delay was permanent in her patience. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking. Her hand would rest lightly on her stomach, fingers splayed like she was grounding herself. Her eyes would drift somewhere far beyond the room, as if she were listening to a future only she could hear. When I asked what she was thinking about, she'd shake her head and smile. "Just thinking," she'd say. I didn't push. I told myself privacy was respect. I told myself love didn't require interrogation. The truth was simpler and uglier. I was too busy being chosen. Too busy enjoying the way she oriented her life around mine. Too busy mistaking devotion for balance. There were paintings on her walls that I never asked about. Abstract pieces, heavy with blues and grays, storms trapped in frames. She said she liked art that felt unfinished. "It feels honest," she told me once, tracing the edge of a canvas with her finger. I nodded without understanding. I thought honesty meant speaking. I didn't know it also meant waiting to be heard. On rainy evenings, we stayed in and let the weather speak for us. The windows fogged with warmth. The world narrowed to the sound of rain and the space between our bodies. Those nights felt sacred, like we were hiding from something inevitable. She would curl into me, and I would promise her things I believed in only because she was listening. "I'll slow down," I said. "After this next break," I said. "When things settle," I said. She never asked when. She trusted me with a future I hadn't learned how to carry. Love should be balanced. Ours leaned like a building designed for collapse, beautiful from the outside, stressed in the foundation. I didn't see the cracks because she kept painting over them with patience. I didn't hear the warning sounds because ambition is loud and guilt whispers. Once, after a long night where I'd come home late and hollow, she handed me a letter. It wasn't sealed, just folded carefully, as if it had already been opened 100 times in her head. "Read it later," she said. "When you have space." I put it on my desk, beneath scripts and notes and reminders of who I was trying to become. Days passed. then weeks. The letter yellowed slightly at the edges, waiting. I told myself I'd read it when things were quieter. Things never were. Still, I thought devotion was enough to keep it standing. I thought love, if sincere, could compensate for imbalance. I didn't understand that love without attention is just another form of neglect, dressed up in good intentions. The night she fell asleep before me, I watched her longer than usual. Her face was calm, but there was a tightness at the corners of her mouth, like she was holding something even in dreams. The rain returned, capping gently against the window, patient and persistent. I reached for the letter on my desk, but stopped short. Some part of me was afraid that reading it would require change, and change felt like failure. Outside, thunder rolled distant, restrained. A warning, not yet a threat. I turned back to her, believing there would be time. There always is. Until there isn't. The day she found out, she didn't cry. I know this now not because she told me, but because silence always leaves fingerprints. Because when someone who has learned how to absorb goes quiet, it means the damage has turned inward. I wasn't there to see it, but I can picture it with terrifying clarity. The bathroom lit by a single bulb, the floor cold against her back, the small white stick trembling in her hand, like it was ashamed of the truth it carried. 2 blue lines, not loud, not dramatic, just decisive. A verdict delivered without a voice. She sat there alone, long enough for the room to memorize her breathing, long enough for the future to split into versions that would never meet again. She didn't scream my name. She didn't call her friends. She didn't cry into a towel like the movies promise women will. She stared at those lines until they stopped looking like ink and started looking like consequence. I was on set that week. Big opportunity. Career-defining. The kind of week you don't interrupt with real life. My phone buzzed constantly, with congratulations, schedules, reminders of how close I was to becoming someone worth keeping. I slept in borrowed trailers and woke up with makeup still ghosting my skin. I told myself exhaustion was proof I was finally doing something right. She watched my interviews on mute. I imagine her sitting on the edge of the couch, laptop balanced on her knees, volume turned all the way down as my mouth moved on the screen, my smile polished, my voice confident. She read the captions instead. Read strangers praising my future, commenting on my potential, talking about me like I was already gone. She saw how easily my name could fly once untethered. She saw how light I was becoming, and she decided not to trap me, not to demand, not to ask. She decided alone because she had always done the heavy lifting quietly. She told herself love meant subtraction, that if she removed herself, removed the complication, the delay, the responsibility, I could keep rising without guilt dragging at my heels. She convinced herself that choosing me meant erasing herself from the equation. That kind of love doesn't announce itself. It deletes. I didn't feel the shift right away. Distance doesn't always arrive as absence. Sometimes it comes as tenderness sharpened just enough to hurt later. She texted me less, but never coldly. Her messages were still warm, just shorter. As if she were rationing words. As if every sentence had to be weighed before it was spent. Eat something. Don't forget your lines. I'm proud of you. Proud, not I miss you. Proud, not come home soon. When I finally did come home, the apartment felt cleaner than it should have. Too organized. Like a place preparing to be remembered rather than lived in. The rain had followed me from the airport, clinging to my coat, pooling at the doorstep. She stood there waiting, hands folded, wearing that careful smile I had mistaken for peace. I talked first. Of course I did. I told her everything, how the director shook my hand like it meant something, how the crew listened when I spoke, how this could change everything. I talked about momentum, about timing, about doors finally opening. I was glowing with news, with myself, with the idea that I had made it out of the waiting room of my own life. She listened. She always listened. Then she stepped forward and hugged me, not tightly, not desperately. The way someone hugs when they are memorizing the shape of you. Her arms circled my back, her cheek pressed against my chest, right where my heart was loudest. She held me like someone saying goodbye in a language I didn't understand. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. Her voice didn't break. That should have been my first clue. I kissed her hair, told her this was for us, told her everything was finally aligning. I said we the way people do when they mean me. She nodded against my chest, her breath slow, her body very still. I mistook sacrifice for support. That night, she didn't sleep much. I know because I woke to find her sitting by the window, knees drawn to her chest, watching the rain carve paths down the glass. The city lights flickered behind her like distant stars. She looked small, concentrated, like she was holding something fragile inside herself and was afraid movement might break it. "Can't sleep?" I asked. She turned and smiled. "Just thinking, always alone." A week later, she was gone. No fight, no accusation, just absence where warmth used to be. Her clothes were missing from the closet. The paintings were gone from the walls, the unfinished storms, the blues and grays that had once felt like atmosphere. The apartment echoed in a way it never had before, as if it were relieved to finally tell the truth. On the kitchen table, there was a note. Not long, not dramatic. Just careful handwriting, steady and restrained, like she had practiced it to keep her hand from shaking. "I need some space to find myself. This isn't your fault. Please don't look for me." That was it. No explanation. No reason sharp enough to argue with. Just words that closed a door without slamming it. I accepted it because ambition doesn't argue with convenience. Because the timing made sense. Because my life was finally accelerating, and grief requires stillness. I told myself she needed this. That love sometimes takes breaks. That she'd come back when she was ready. I didn't notice what else was missing. In the bathroom, the trash had been emptied too thoroughly. The cabinet under the sink was bare. No test wrappers. No discarded evidence of a moment that would have changed everything. She had erased herself so completely that even the truth had nowhere to land. I went back to work. I told people we were taking time apart. I said it like it was mutual. I said it like I wasn't sleeping on only one side of the bed. Like I didn't flinch every time my phone buzzed, hoping it would be her breaking her own rule. Weeks passed, then months. Success came, loud and hungry. Applause replaced her voice. Interviews replaced our late-night talks. I kept moving because stopping felt dangerous. Because stopping meant noticing the hollow space she left behind. It wasn't until much later, too much later, that the silence began to speak. A mutual friend hesitated when saying her name. A look exchanged and quickly buried. A conversation cut short. Guilt has a scent, and I started to recognize it everywhere. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It never does. It came in fragments. A missed doctor's appointment mentioned too casually. A date that didn't line up. A realization that landed so hard I had to sit down. She hadn't left to find herself. She had left to protect me. I didn't know she was carrying a heartbeat that sounded like mine. Didn't know there had been a future growing quietly while I was busy chasing another one. Didn't know love had made a choice on my behalf and paid the price in full. That night, it rained again. I stood by the same window she once watched, rain tracing familiar paths, the city indifferent as ever. On the table, where the note had once been, there was nothing now. No letter, no explanation. Just the echo of a decision I was never invited to make. And somewhere out there, a life that might have called me home, silenced before it ever learned my name. Her absence was clean, surgical. No shattered glasses, no slammed doors. No dramatic scene for memory to cling to. Just subtraction. At first, it was small things. A scarf missing from the hook by the door. her mug no longer waiting beside mine, the faint ring of dried coffee erased like it had never been hers. Then books vanished from the shelves, the ones she reread when she needed comfort, the ones she underlined softly, as if afraid to bruise the pages. Each disappearance was precise, intentional, like she was performing surgery on her life, removing herself without damaging the surrounding tissue. She didn't want to leave scars. I noticed, but I didn't stop it. That's the part I still don't know how to forgive. Her toothbrush disappeared next. Then the framed photo from the night market, the one where she'd been laughing too hard to look at the camera, hair wind-tangled, joy unguarded. I stood in the bathroom, holding the empty cup where it used to be, convincing myself this was what space looked like, that this was healthy, mature. By the time the paintings came down, the walls looked unfamiliar, naked, as if the apartment had exhaled something vital and didn't know how to inhale again. Pale rectangles marked where her art once hung unfinished storms, unresolved skies. They left behind outlines like ghosts refusing to move on. I told people we'd grown apart. I said it easily, practiced, like a line I'd learned for an audition. I said timing wasn't right, that love sometimes ends quietly, that there was no drama, no betrayal. People nodded, relieved. Quiet endings make everyone comfortable. They don't ask follow-up questions. They don't require sides. No one asked where she went, and I didn't volunteer the truth. The truth was simpler and heavier than any explanation I offered. I didn't look for her hard enough. I sent one message, then another, both careful, casual, respectful of the boundaries she'd drawn. When she didn't respond, I told myself that was the answer. That love meant letting go. That chasing would only turn affection into pressure. What I didn't admit was that part of me was relieved. Relieved I didn't have to choose. Relieved I didn't have to slow down. Relieved I didn't have to confront the possibility that I had already failed her long before she left. Success arrived wearing her sacrifice as a disguise. Awards came first, small ones at first, then larger, heavier, shaped like permanence. Applause followed me into rooms I'd once only imagined entering. My name appeared in places I used to search for late at night, half hoping, half dreading to see it. People told me I deserved it. They didn't know what it had cost. On stage, lights blinding, acceptance speech rehearsed in my head, I felt a moment of vertigo. A sense that someone should be standing just off to the side, watching with quiet pride. Someone who wouldn't clap too loudly. Someone who would smile like this outcome had always been inevitable. She wasn't there. I told myself that was okay. At night, though, success was loud but thin. It didn't fill space. It echoed through it. The apartment felt larger without her things breaking it into warmth. I slept diagonally across the bed, chasing a comfort that no longer existed. Her side stayed cold, untouched, like a rule I refused to break. That's when the dreams started. At first, they were harmless. Just sound laughter drifting through rooms I couldn't see. High and bright and unfamiliar, echoing against walls that should have held furniture, but didn't. I'd walk toward it in the dream, heart racing, convinced that if I turned the corner fast enough, I'd understand. I never did. I woke up unsettled, sheets tangled around my legs, heart pounding for reasons I blamed on stress, on exhaustion, on ambition finally catching up with my body. I drank more coffee. I slept less. I told myself this was the price of becoming who I wanted to be. Guilt whispers before it screams. I felt it in strange moments in grocery stores, when I passed the aisle she loved, in cafes where I caught myself ordering 2 drinks, in quiet elevators where my reflection looked older than it should have. Sometimes, when rain hit the windows just right, I could almost feel her sitting beside me, knees tucked in, watching the world dissolve into water. I ignored it. I told myself memory was just habit, that loneliness was temporary, that eventually someone else would occupy the spaces she'd left behind, and the ache would fade into something manageable. But the apartment disagreed. It creaked differently at night, settling into a silence that felt intentional. The walls held on to her absence, like they were afraid to forget her. Even the air felt thinner, like it had learned to live without warmth and didn't to know how to ask for it back. One evening, while searching for a misplaced script, I found something she'd missed. A letter. Not the one she left on the table, that one I'd memorized, folded and unfolded until the paper softened like cloth. This one was different. Tucked between notebooks in a drawer I rarely used. Unsealed, undated, written in her careful handwriting. The ink pressed just a little too hard in places. I didn't open it right away. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, like it was holding more than words, like it was waiting for me to be brave enough to deserve it. I set it down. That's the kind of cowardice that doesn't look like fear. It looks like patience, like restraint, like telling yourself later is a kindness. Later never came. The laughter in my dreams grew louder, closer. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from behind a closed door in my own apartment. I'd wake up and walk the halls, barefoot, checking rooms that hadn't changed, each one empty, each one accusing me of something I couldn't yet name. I started avoiding home, stayed out later, accepted every invitation, filled my calendar with noise so silence couldn't catch up. But guilt is patient. It waits for the quiet moments you can't schedule away. One night, after a long shoot, rain pouring down like the city was trying to wash itself clean, I stood under the same bus stop where I'd first met her. The shelter looked smaller now, less significant. Or maybe I was just heavier with everything I hadn't said. I wondered if she'd stood somewhere like this after leaving, holding herself together, choosing silence again. I wondered if she ever expected me to follow. The envelope sat at home, waiting. Her absence wasn't violent. It didn't demand attention. It didn't ruin me all at once. It just removed something essential and trusted time to do the rest. That night, I went home and placed the letter on the table. I sat across from it, rain tapping against the windows like an impatient reminder. I didn't open it. Not yet. Some truths don't chase you. They wait until you finally stop running. I wasn't supposed to be there. That's the lie I tell myself when I need distance from guilt, wrong place, wrong time, coincidence dressed up as fate. But the truth is harsher and simpler. Life has a way of correcting itself violently when you ignore it long enough. I had taken a wrong turn trying to avoid traffic. The city rerouted me without asking, funneling my car into a quiet neighborhood I didn't recognize. Trees lined the street like witnesses. A small school sat at the corner, its walls painted a tired yellow, its gate half open, like it was expecting someone late. I pulled over to check directions. Children's laughter spilled into the air carefree, sharp, unfamiliar. It hit me harder than applause ever had. I sat there longer than necessary, hands on the steering wheel, watching parents gather backpacks and bent knees and tiny shoes that kicked at gravel. I don't know why I walked inside. Maybe I needed the bathroom. Maybe I needed shelter from something unnamed. Maybe some part of me already knew. The administrator greeted me with a tired smile, eyes skimming past my face to the clipboard in her hand. "You're here about the transfer, right?" she asked, already reaching for a folder. I opened my mouth to correct her. I didn't. The folder landed in my hands with a soft thud. Ordinary beige, the kind of object that carries entire lives without ceremony. I nodded once, the smallest betrayal of truth, and stepped aside. I opened it without thinking. That's when I saw her handwriting, careful, measured, familiar, in a way that made my stomach drop before my mind could catch up. The same slant she used in grocery lists. The same pressure at the ends of words, like she was afraid the letters might float away if she didn't anchor them. My fingers went cold. Page after page medical notes, schedules, emergency contacts. A child's name written at the top in rounded letters, softened by repetition. 5 years old. Kindergarten. My vision narrowed. Then I saw the line. Father. Unknown. Ink. Permanent. Unapologetic. My knees weakened. A delayed reaction finally catching up to reality. I leaned against the counter, breath fracturing in my chest like glass under pressure. The room tilted not dramatically, not enough to fall, but enough to know I was no longer standing in the same world I de-entered minutes before. Unknown, not absent, not unavailable, not deceased. Unknown. I imagined her filling out the form, sitting at a small desk, maybe the same kitchen table she once folded herself away from me at. Pen hovering over that line, longer than necessary. A pause heavy enough to bruise. The decision arriving quietly, the way all her hardest choices did. Tell the truth and invite questions. Write my name and invite disruption. Erase me and preserve consistency. She chose silence. She chose the version of reality that required the least explanation for a child who would someday ask why his life didn't look like the others. She erased me again, not out of cruelty, but out of habit. A child, my child, 5 years old. The number echoed in my skull, colliding with memories I didn't know how to place. 5 years of first steps I didn't witness. 5 years of scraped knees, kissed better by someone else. 5 years of birthdays, illnesses, laughter, questions. 5 years of a life that grew without my shadow anywhere near it. Every achievement I had celebrated, every award, every headline, every standing ovation, collapsed under the weight of a life I'd never held. Success suddenly felt obscene, like I'd been applauding myself while something essential starved quietly off stage. The administrator said something, asked if everything was okay. I nodded again, automatically, returned the folder with hands that didn't feel like mine, murmured an apology about a misunderstanding, backed away before my face could betray me. Outside, the air felt too thin. I walked without direction, feet carrying me toward the playground like they were answering a call my mind hadn't made. Children ran past me, small hurricanes of sound and motion. One boy tripped and laughed instead of crying. Another tugged at his mother's sleeve, demanding attention with unearned confidence. Then I saw him. I didn't know it was him, but my body did. He sat alone on the low steps near the sandbox, concentrating on something in his hands, a small red toy car missing one wheel. His hair fell into his eyes in the same careless way mine does when I forget to look in mirrors. His mouth tilted slightly when he focused, an expression I'd seen reflected back at me in dressing rooms and dark windows. He pushed the car forward anyway, making quiet engine noises, undeterred by imperfection. Something in my chest split open. I didn't move closer, didn't speak. Distance suddenly felt sacred, dangerous. I watched him from where I stood, afraid that if I stepped forward, the illusion would shatter or worse, become real. He looked up. For a fraction of a second, our eyes met. There was no recognition, no spark of destiny, just curiosity. A stranger registering another adult in the world and deciding quickly that I wasn't important enough to hold attention. He went back to his car. I stayed frozen. That was the moment something irreversible broke, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. A fracture deep enough that no amount of time would ever smooth it out completely. I didn't cry. Men like me are trained not to. We learn early how to redirect pain into productivity, how to turn loss into narrative, how to keep our faces still while something inside us collapses. Tears are inefficient. They don't change outcomes. But grief doesn't need permission. It settled into me like a second spine altering how I stood, how I breathed, how I understood the past. Every memory rewired itself around this new truth. Every silence reinterpreted. Every sacrifice reweighed. The letter at home, the one I'd been avoiding, suddenly burned in my mind. She hadn't just left me. She had protected him. from instability, from absence disguised as ambition, from a man who loved too late and noticed too slowly. A bell rang. Children gathered. Teachers called names. The boy stood, dusted off his knees, and joined the line without looking back, just like his mother had. I walked away before anyone could ask who I was. Back to my car. Back to a life that no longer fit. My hands shook as I turned the key. The engine roared too loudly in the quiet street, an intrusion I suddenly hated. I didn't go home right away. I drove until the city blurred into something unrecognizable, harked, sat in silence that finally screamed. 5 years. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and let the weight of that number crush whatever illusions I had left. This wasn't a mistake I could apologize for. This wasn't a conversation waiting to happen. This was a life already lived without me. When I finally did go home, the letter was still there, waiting. I picked it up. My hand steadied, not because I was calm, but because I was ready to be undone. Outside, the weather shifted. Clouds gathered like witnesses. Thunder rolled low and distant, not yet threatening, but certain. I didn't open the letter. Not yet. But for the first time, I knew I would. Some absences are survivable. Others rewrite you before you even know what you've lost. She didn't deny it. That was the first thing that disarmed me. Not guilt, not panic, not a hurried explanation rehearsed over years. Just acceptance. When I finally found her, standing in the doorway of a narrow apartment that smelled faintly of detergent and old books, she looked at me like she had been expecting this moment all along. Not broken, but worn in the way people are when they've carried something heavy without ever setting it down. The hallway light flickered behind me, casting shadows across her face, carving new lines I didn't remember earning the right to notice. Her hair was shorter now, practical. Her eyes were the same steady, careful, but there was a depth there that hadn't existed before. Or maybe I'd never learned how to see it. Her voice was soft, not apologetic, not defensive, just tired, as if love were a weapon. I felt my hands curl into fists at my sides. Heat rose up my spine, fast and sharp. Every argument I'd rehearsed in my head surged forward, desperate to be spoken. Every question, every missed year, every night I stood in silence wondering what kind of man I had been to deserve erasure. I wanted to scream. How she could look at me now and still believe she'd done the right thing. At the way her shoulders sat slightly forward, like she was used to shielding something. At the faint tremor in her hands she didn't bother hiding. At the shadows beneath her eyes that no amount of sleep could erase. I saw years there, years of decisions made quietly, consequences paid in full, nights endured without witness. I saw loneliness that hadn't turned bitter. She stepped aside, letting me in without asking if I wanted to come. The apartment was small but clean, every object purposeful, no clutter, no indulgence. The walls were bare, except for one painting above the couch, a child's attempt at a stormy sky, thick blue strokes clashing with yellow lines that might have been lightning or hope. He had been here. She noticed my gaze and followed it. He painted that, she said. There was pride in her voice, but also distance, as if she'd learned to keep even joy carefully contained. We sat across from each other at a narrow table scarred with time. She folded her hands together, waiting, not preparing a defense, just ready. Fragile, no flinch, no excuse, just truth. I laughed once a short, humorless sound that startled both of us. Love shouldn't require erasure, I said. It shouldn't mean disappearing someone so completely that their own child grows up thinking they don't exist. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. I know, she said, but loving you meant knowing you. You were already running, already half gone. I didn't want to be the reason you stopped and resented it. The room felt smaller now, like the walls were listening. You didn't let me decide who I could be. Outside, rain began to fall soft at first, and heavier, like the world had decided to underscore what we couldn't say aloud. "You think I wouldn't have chosen him?" I asked. "Chosen you?" Her mouth trembled, just slightly. "I didn't want him to be someone you fit into your life later," she continued. The restraint in her voice cracked then, just enough to let pain slip through. Years of it. Quiet, disciplined suffering that had never once asked to be seen. "I didn't hate you," she said quickly, as if afraid I might believe it. "I never blamed you. I just loved him more than I loved being chosen." The room went still. Images rushed in his small hands, the way he pushed a broken toy forward anyway, the absence written in ink. Father. Unknown. Not because I hadn't existed, but because she had decided he deserved certainty over potential. "You took my name from him," I said. I stood and walked to the window, needing space before grief turned into something uglier. Rain streaked the glass, bending the city into watercolor shapes. For a moment, I imagined what it would have looked like if I'd been here. Small dinners, cramped rooms filled with laughter, nights that mattered more than headlines. "You don't get to decide what ruins me," I said finally. She came to stand beside me, careful not to touch. And I didn't want him growing up learning how to burn himself just to stay warm. I turned to her then, really turned, and saw tears finally spill over. Silent, controlled, like everything else she'd ever given me. "You think I don't burn now?" I asked. "I know you do." Just two people standing in the wreckage of a love that had tried to be noble and ended up cruel instead. "I want to know him," I said. She hesitated, not out of refusal, but caution. "Soon," she said, "but not like this." And truth. I hated that she was still protecting everyone even now. "You don't get to disappear again," I said quietly. "Not from this," she met my eyes. "Neither do you. The kind that soaks through clothing, through skin, through denial." Behind me, the door closed, not softly, not loudly, just final enough to matter. For the first time, love didn't feel like loss alone. And somewhere, just out of reach, a child was learning the shape of his own name. She looked at me like I was a stranger with familiar eyes. Not afraid, not curious, careful. The kind of careful that doesn't to belong to children, unless they've learned early that the world can change without warning. She sat at the small table by the window, afternoon light spilling across scattered papers and crayons, her legs swinging slightly, but never fully relaxed. Her gaze flicked up to me, measured me, then returned to the page like she'd already decided not to trust the moment too much. Same silence, same caution. My chest tightened. I recognized it because I'd lived inside it for years. She held a blue crayon in her fist, like it was armor, fingers wrapped tight, knuckles faintly pale. The paper beneath it was covered in half-drawn shapes clouds that didn't quite close. A house without doors, a sun tucked shyly into the corner as if unsure it belonged there. Her mother stood behind me, close enough that I could feel her presence, but far enough to keep distance intact. She hadn't told her much, only that someone important was coming, someone from before. I was grateful for that mercy. The room smelled like pencil shavings and laundry soap, ordinary, grounded, nothing like the dramatic setting my fear had prepared me for. No thunder, no heavy music, just a child and a table and the unbearable weight of everything I'd missed. She looked up again. "Are you my mom's friend?" she asked. Her voice was steady, curious, but not hopeful. A question designed to protect itself from disappointment. I swallowed. The word father rose in my throat like a confession I hadn't earned the right to make. It pressed against my ribs, heavy and dangerous. Say it too soon, and it could fracture something delicate. Say it wrong, and it might never recover. I didn't trust myself with it. I knelt anyway, lowered myself until we were closer to eye level, until the power difference didn't feel like a threat. My knees protested against the hard floor, a small price I accepted without hesitation. From here, I could see it clearly, the way her eyes mirrored mine, the slight tilt of her head when she studied something unfamiliar, the quiet intensity she wore like a shield. Something like that, I said. It wasn't a lie. It was just incomplete. She considered me for a long moment, then nodded once, as if filing the information away for later. She returned to her drawing, pushing the crayon across the page with renewed focus. The sound was soft, rhythmic. A heartbeat made visible. I watched her hands, small, capable, confident in their own way. Hands that had learned to open juice boxes, tie laces, comfort themselves. Hands I should have known from the beginning. "What are you drawing?" I asked gently. She didn't look up. "The sky," she said. "It's very blue," I offered. She paused, then added a darker line across the page. "Sometimes it isn't." I closed my eyes for half a second. Of course she knew that. Her mother shifted behind me. I felt it, the tension, the readiness to intervene if needed. Not because she didn't trust me, but because she trusted her child more. I respected that. "I like your armor," I said, nodding toward the crayon. She glanced at it, then at me. "It's not armor." "No?" I asked. "It's just mine." That was better. She slid the paper toward me suddenly, catching me off guard. "Do you want to draw?" My breath caught. This was how children invite you into their world, not with declarations, but with permission. With an offering so simple, it feels sacred. "I'd like that," I said. She handed me a green crayon. I noticed it was worn down, the label peeled off completely. "Well used. Loved." I drew a line. At another. My hand shook at first, unused to something that didn't perform back. Slowly, I sketched a tree, crooked, imperfect, rooted deep into the page. I added leaves that didn't quite match, branches that went in strange directions. She leaned closer, inspecting my work. "That tree looks tired," she said matter-of-factly. I smiled despite the ache in my throat. "It's been standing a long time." She nodded. "Trees don't move even when they want to." Her words landed harder than she knew. She took the crayon back and added something to the drawing, small circles near the base of the tree. "Those are stones," she said, "so it doesn't fall." I didn't trust myself to speak. We sat like that for a while drawing, not talking much, sharing space without expectation. Outside, clouds gathered slowly, the sky dimming into something gentler, less exposed. The light softened, as if the day understood what was happening and chose not to interrupt. Her mother finally spoke. "Do you want some juice?" She asked her. She shook her head. Later. Then she looked at me again. "You can stay a little," she said. Not a question. A statement. My chest tightened painfully. "I'd like that," I replied. She smiled then, not wide, not careless. Just a small curve of her lips, like she was testing the shape of happiness before committing to it. When she smiled, it felt like forgiveness I hadn't earned. Not the kind that absolves you, but the kind that invites you to do better. The kind that doesn't erase the past, but refuses to let it poison the future. Eventually, she stood and walked toward her room, then stopped and turned back. "You can watch," she said, "but don't touch my toys." I raised my hand slightly in surrender. "Deal." She disappeared down the hall. Her mother exhaled softly, like she'd been holding her breath the entire time. "She likes you," she said, surprised despite herself. I shook my head. She tolerated me. "That's a lot," she replied. We didn't talk much after that. Words felt unnecessary, fragile. I watched the hallway, listening to faint sounds, movement, humming, the quiet life of a child existing just beyond my reach. When it was time to leave, she came back out with a book tucked under her arm. "Bye," she said. "Bye," I answered, careful not to let too much into the word. She hesitated, then waved once, awkward and precise. I waved back, mirroring her exactly. She smiled again, smaller this time, and disappeared behind her mother's leg. Outside, evening had settled in. The sky was streaked with gray and gold, the air heavy with the promise of rain. I stood on the sidewalk longer than necessary, staring at the building like it might vanish if I turned away too quickly. I didn't touch the door, didn't press for more, didn't ask for certainty. Some things need time to learn your shape. That night, alone in my apartment, I sat on the floor with the drawing she'd let me keep. The tree, the stones, the sky that knew how to darken. I stared at it until my vision blurred. Then I cried. Not the quiet, controlled tears I'd mastered over the years. Not the kind that slip out unnoticed. This was different. This was grief meeting grace, and not knowing which one to thank. I cried because I hadn't been there. Because love had survived without me. Because somehow, impossibly, it had left room for me anyway. Outside, rain finally fell steady, cleansing, unapologetic. And for the first time in years, I let it sound like hope. I didn't sue. I didn't shame her in courtrooms or interviews. I didn't weaponize my platform, didn't rewrite the story so the world would clap at my pain. I didn't demand apologies that would have tasted like ash. The kind of justice that destroys always asks for an audience. I had learned too late that real repair prefers witnesses who are willing to stay. Justice didn't come from destruction. It came from presence. The first time I showed up, no one noticed. A folding chair scraped against the floor of a school auditorium. A program folded too many times, creased at the edges. The smell of glue and construction paper hung in the air. Parents murmured to each other, phones lifted, eyes scanning for the moment worth recording. I sat in the back. She stood on the small stage with a paper crown slipping over one ear, fingers fidgeting at her sides. When the music started, she sang softly off-key in places, brave in others. Her eyes searched the room with a caution that still broke me. They passed over me once, twice, then paused. Recognition didn't arrive as joy. It arrived as consideration. Her mouth didn't curve into a smile. She didn't wave. She just held the note a second longer, as if grounding herself in the fact that something had changed and had not yet hurt her. That was enough. More than enough. Afterward, she ran to her mother first. Always. I stayed where I was, hands open, waiting for the day when my presence wouldn't feel like pressure. When she turned and walked toward me, steps measured, it felt like a negotiation with gravity. "You came," she said. "I said I would," I answered. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to telling her mother about the song, the crown, the part she forgot and remembered again. I listened like a man being trusted with oxygen. I showed up again, and again, to recitals where the piano bench squeaked and the applause was uneven, to science fairs where the projects leaned and the titles were misspelled with confidence, to soccer games where she spent more time chasing clouds than the ball. I learned the geography of her days, the classroom window that caught the afternoon light, the bench by the playground where she sat when noise became too much, the path she took home when she needed quiet. I learned to be early, to be patient, to be unremarkable. The world didn't care. Cameras didn't follow. No headlines announced the man who sat through parent-teacher meetings and asked about reading levels in playground conflicts. The moments that rebuilt me were small and stubborn and invisible. They didn't trend. They didn't ask to be admired. I rebuilt my legacy with honesty instead of ambition. That meant leaving rooms where my name would have mattered, turning down offers that required absence, saying no to applause so I could say yes to bedtime stories and grocery store debates about cereal. It meant learning how to stand in the background without feeling erased and realizing that this time, being unseen was a choice I was finally making for the right reason. At night, I practiced patience like a skill. I learned how to listen without fixing, how to ask questions that didn't corner, how to let silence be a bridge instead of a wall. I learned that trust doesn't arrive on time. It arrives when it's safe. She started leaving drawings in my bag. Trees with stones at their base. Skies that darkened and lightened depending on the day. A house with 2 doors this time. One open, one closed, both allowed to exist. I kept them all, flattened and careful. A museum of progress that no one else needed to see. Her mother watched from a distance. Not cold, not resentful, just unsure. Redemption is a language not everyone is taught to speak. She hovered at the edges of events, a respectful orbit, arms crossed not in defense, but in habit. I saw the calculations flicker across her face. Is this real? Is it temporary? Will he disappear again when the cost rises? I didn't ask for forgiveness. I offered consistency. Weeks turned into months. Seasons rotated quietly. The weather became a calendar we didn't have to argue with. Rain meant shared umbrellas and wet cuffs. Sun meant chalk on sidewalks and ice cream melting faster than promises. Winter brought scarves too big and hands tucked into pockets that were always cold. One evening, after a school event that ended later than planned, we stood together in the parking lot. The asphalt still held the day's heat. The air smelled like dust and relief. "You don't have to stay every time," she said, eyes on the horizon. "I know you're busy." I shook my head. "This is where I am." She studied my face, searching for the old escape routes. She didn't find them. The silence stretched not tense, just thoughtful. "You didn't steal my life," I said, because the words had been waiting too long. "You protected it. And you paid alone." Her breath caught. She looked down at her hands, at the faint scars time leaves on people who endure instead of demand. "I didn't know how else to love you," she said. "I know," I answered. And for the first time, it didn't feel like surrender. Justice, I learned, is not symmetrical. It doesn't balance scales with equal weight. It steadies them with care. It doesn't require punishment to be valid. It requires responsibility to be lived. The first time my daughter took my hand in public, it was unannounced. We were crossing a street, the light counting down, traffic impatient. She reached for me like it was obvious, like gravity had made the decision before she did. Her grip was firm, trusting. I felt the years compress into that single point of contact. "Green means go," she said, instructive, solemn. "Yes, it does," I replied. On the other side, she let go without ceremony. Trust given, trust returned to its place. I understood then that love doesn't need to cling to be real. It needs to know where it belongs. At home, I finally opened the letter, the one I'd avoided long enough to earn its weight. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't ask me to absolve her or condemn myself. It was a map drawn by someone trying to navigate with limited light. She wrote about fear that loved too much, about a future she didn't trust the world to protect, about choosing the certainty of hardship over the gamble of shared ruin. She wrote about me, not as a villain, not as a savior, but as a man she loved and didn't know how to keep. I folded the letter and placed it beside the drawings. Not above them, beside them. Context matters. There were still days I failed, days I arrived late, days I answered my phone when I shouldn't have. Justice didn't erase my flaws. It demanded I meet them honestly. When I apologized, I did it without theater. When I promised, I did it sparingly. When I stayed, I stayed. One night, after a long day that had been too loud for her, she asked me to sit on the floor while she built something with blocks. Towers rose and fell. She rebuilt without frustration, methodical, curious. "Why do you come back?" she asked, not looking up. The question was gentle, not a trap. A child's way of checking if the ground will hold. "Because this is where my feet are," I said. "And because I want to learn how to be good at it." She nodded, considering, then placed a block carefully at the base of a new tower. "Okay," she said. That was the verdict. Outside, the rain began again, not dramatic, not cleansing, just steady, the kind that teaches the ground how to drink. Her mother stood in the doorway, watching us from the threshold. Our eyes met. No accusations passed between us. No debts were tallied. Just an understanding that justice had chosen a quieter path, and we were walking it together, even if our steps didn't always align. I didn't win. I didn't lose. I stayed. And somewhere between a folding chair and a paper crown, between a held hand and a letter, finally justice stopped looking like punishment and started looking like a life rebuilt, slowly, visibly, in full view of the people who mattered. At the edge of the room, my daughter's tower leaned, imperfect and determined. I didn't reach to steady it. I watched it stand on its own and waited for whatever came next. Today, my daughter writes my name on forms, slowly, carefully, proudly. Her tongue presses against her lip as she shapes each letter, as if my name is something delicate that might bruise if handled too quickly. The pen pauses between syllables. She looks up at me, not for permission, not for reassurance, but to make sure I'm still there. I nod. She finishes. Ink settles into paper, permanent in a way memory never is. For a long time, my name existed only in absence, in unsent letters, in conversations that stopped just short of saying it. Now it lives in margins and boxes, in school files and permission slips. It lives where responsibility is recorded, where someone can be called if things go wrong. It lives where I can be reached. I didn't know how much that would matter until I saw her hand lift from the page, satisfied, like she had just completed something important, not for me, but for herself. Claiming space for a truth she no longer felt the need to hide. Outside, the afternoon rain taps against the window, gentle and persistent. The kind of rain that doesn't flood or threaten. It just reminds the world to breathe. She likes this weather, says it makes everything quieter, safer. Did I spell it right? She asks. You always do, I say. She smiles, small and contained, then returns to her coloring. Blues today. Greens. A horizon dividing the page into sky and ground. She's been obsessed with lines lately, where one thing ends and another begins, where they touch without becoming the same. I watch her from the kitchen doorway, holding a mug I've reheated twice and still haven't finished. This is what remains, I think, not the grand moments, not the speeches I once imagined giving to explain myself, but this watching her choose colors, knowing I'm allowed to witness it. There was a time when I believed success needed proof, numbers, applause, evidence that the world could point to and agree upon. I chased it with the desperation of someone who thought worth was a limited resource, that if I didn't claim mine loudly, it would disappear. Now, when people ask about my success, I tell them the truth. It was built on love that never asked for credit. They don't always understand. Some nod politely, waiting for the part where I talk about strategy or sacrifice or resilience in a way that can be monetized. But I've learned not to translate my life into a language that flattens it. The truth is quieter. It sounds like early mornings and packed lunches, like reminders set for school pickups and dentist appointments. It sounds like learning when to speak and when to stay silent, like apologizing without defending myself, like showing up even when no one is watching. Her mother understands this truth now, too. We stand on opposite sides of the room, more often than not out of distance, but respect. We learned the hard way that proximity doesn't guarantee safety, that love can suffocate if it forgets to listen. So we give each other space. We coordinate calendars. We share updates without rewriting the past. Sometimes, when our eyes meet, there's an echo of what was lost. Not pain recognition, the kind that doesn't demand repair, only acknowledgement. We don't need to forgive each other daily. We need to remain honest. That is what remains between us. One evening, I find an old painting while cleaning out a closet. A canvas she once worked on late into the night, back when we still pretended silence was temporary. The colors are darker than I remember. Stormy. A figure stands at the edge of the frame, half-formed, as if unsure whether it belongs. I almost put it back. Instead, I hang it in the hallway. My daughter notices it immediately. She stands in front of it longer than expected, studying the brushstrokes, the shadows. "Who made this?" she asks. "Your mom," I answer. She tilts her head. "It looks sad." "Yes," I say. "But it's still standing." She considers this, then nods, as if filing it away for later. "I like it," she decides. It tells the truth. That night, after she falls asleep, I sit beneath the painting and let myself feel everything I once postponed. Not regret sharp enough to wound, but regret softened by understanding. The kind that teaches instead of punishes. I think about the man I was when I thought justice meant being right, when I believed pain deserved an audience, when I thought revenge was proof of self-respect. I was wrong. Some stories don't end with revenge. They end with responsibility. Responsibility to stay, to be consistent, to accept that love doesn't erase consequences, it lives with them. Responsibility to carry what remains without turning it into a performance. The next morning, she hands me a folded piece of paper before school. "For you," she says, casual but deliberate. Inside is a drawing. 3 figures this time, not holding hands, just standing under the same sky. The rain is there again, but lighter. Almost finished. I don't praise it too much. I don't turn it into a moment bigger than it wants to be. I simply say thank you and place it where I keep the others. She watches me do it. That's the intimacy. No, not closeness without consent, but trust without demand. At school, a teacher stops me in the hallway. "She talks about you," she says, smiling. "About how you come to everything." I nod, unsure what to say. "She seems grounded," the teacher adds. Safe, safe. The word follows me all the way home. That evening, as I help with homework, she struggles with a word, erases it, writes it again. Frustration tightens her shoulders. I wait. When she looks up, asking without asking, I lean closer. "Take your time," I say. "It doesn't disappear if you go slowly." She breathes out, tries again. This is how cycles break, not with declarations, but with patience practiced in small rooms. Later, after she's asleep, the house settles into its familiar quiet. I stand by the window, rain returning like an old friend. Somewhere in the glass, my reflection overlaps with the painting in the hallway, with the drawings on the fridge, with the name written carefully on forms. What remains is not the life I imagined. It's better. It's real. Tomorrow, she'll write my name again. Maybe faster. Maybe with a little less concentration. One day, she won't need to look up to make sure I'm still there. That will be its own kind of justice. For now, I turn off the lights, leaving the hallway illuminated just enough for the painting to be seen. A figure at the edge, still standing, still unfinished. Like all the best truths, waiting quietly for what comes next.